couple of words about myself. I am connecting from Brussels, the capital of Europe, but I'm a Spanish national. My name is Cristina Gallach. I have served NATO, the European Union, the United Nations as Under-Secretary General, and my home country, Spain, as a State Secretary for Foreign Affairs and other positions. So it's for me an honor to be, together with you discussing about diplomacy. And I have had the privilege in my different professional experiences to make the author of our book today. We always had a fantastic relationship when he was a journalist, correspondent for different media, and I was working both for the EU and later on the UN. Let me maybe summarize very, very quickly a couple of features about the author of Teaching Diplomatic Tradecraft. He's the founding executive director of the Washington International Diplomatic Academy, which is an independent organization that provides practical professional training in diplomacy. He's had a long career as a correspondent, mainly specializing on foreign policy, and has followed around the world a number of state secretaries from the United States, and has also authored a number of books on foreign policy. And we count with the presence and the insights of one of the authors of a chapter, or in fact, several chapters of the book, Charles Great, Ambassador Charles Great, who was US Ambassador to Zimbabwe and Cambodia, Deputy Chief of Mission in Sierra Leone, and Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. He is a retired US Army officer that also served, and I should underline it, as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Prisoners of War and Missing Personnel Affairs. We had wanted and we had planned to have with us Ambassador Janice Jacobs, a former US Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs, who is also author, in fact, of a chapter together with Ambassador Ray, but also other contributions to the book. But unfortunately, she's not well, and we wish her the very quick recovery. So with this very already sufficient, I hope, introductory remarks, I will turn directly to our author, to Nicholas, to tell us what is the book about and why you wrote it, and to kick off our session. Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cristina. Very happy that you could join us today. I would just, to avoid feedback, I would ask you if you could turn off your microphone just while I'm talking, and Cristina, is that okay? All right. And then those of you who are on camera, can you please turn off your cameras? It'll help with the bandwidth and the weight of this whole virtual room here. And as you see, we're recording it as well. So now I understand that some of you are not able to see me, but see a logo. If that is the case, this is because of your connection. And so I hope that at some point you will be able to see me. Now, I will take off the poster with all the names. So we just wanted to have them on there for you to remind yourself who will be talking or speaking today, although one of them, of course, Ambassador Jacobs, unfortunately has COVID. We're all very surprised because it's May and it's 2024, right? But just goes to show you that that nasty disease is still around. Okay, let me get rid of, okay, so we have more space on the screen. And all right, well, thank you all of you for joining us. I assume other people will keep streaming in. We had over 120 people sign up. So I know that many people sign up and never follow through, but I'm glad that those of you who are here are able to join us. Okay, so on to answer Christina's question, and then making sure that we'll have time for all the questions there. How did this all happen? It actually started with one of my other books that Cristina was talking about. This one, America's Other Army, which I wrote in 2012. This is a book about the US Foreign Service, and based on my visits to about 80 American embassies and consulates and interviews with about 600 Foreign Service officers. Many things, of course, I discovered while researching the book, which took years, as you can imagine. But there are a couple of things that just stuck out to me, and they led to this new book eventually. The first thing that, well, I knew diplomacy was important, right? What I didn't appreciate was the direct impact that the diplomacy and how diplomats do their jobs on a daily basis affects the security and the prosperity of a country, and directly affects the life of what I call real people. I don't think that is appreciated enough, right? Most people, I believe, think that diplomacy doesn't touch them. Well, no, diplomacy touches every single life if you're willing to learn about it. And the other thing that surprised me was the answers to a question that I would ask everyone I interviewed. And the question was, when you joined the Foreign Service, did you know what you were getting yourself into? 99% of the people said no. They had really no realistic idea about what they would be doing, let alone how they would do it. Right? The culture was, and the mentality was, oh, diplomacy is not a profession you can teach in the classroom. You have to learn it on the job. So you learn by watching other people, doing what they do, shadowing your boss, whatever, right? And kind of by osmosis almost. And so I started thinking, okay, so wait, there is a profession that you join and you are called the diplomat on day one, but you don't have the qualifications and the skills, or at least many of them, and it takes you years to become good at your profession, but you're called the diplomat from day one. And then you are supposed to advance and protect your country's national interest, and they're giving you this responsibility on day one, but you don't have most of the skills? What? So training on the job, would I be comfortable going to a doctor who trains on the job? Or a lawyer? No, right? Okay, I know it's not the same, but it's a profession, right? Okay, so then the other coin of this was, the other side of the coin was, so you, one side I look at this is from the point of view of the person, of the officer, and then the government, right? So the officer doesn't have the skills, but it's because they can't learn them anywhere else, right? Even a degree in international relations does not teach you diplomatic practice. And when you come into the Foreign Service of any country, you don't really, I mean, even at the time, even it was even worse, 10, 12 years ago, you didn't get almost any training. You got some bureaucratics, as I call them, maybe some language training, consulate, how to do visas and all that. But the tradecraft was almost non-existent. Again, you had to learn it on the job. And then the other part that stunned me was when I would ask various officers about what are the criteria for a good officer? What makes a good political officer or a good economic officer? And then can you give me examples? 2004, this is all the way 20 years ago, but this is when I was starting my research. I was in Sudan, and we didn't have an ambassador at the time because of the downgrading of relations, and we had a chargé. So the chargé introduces me to the head of the political section. It was political economic combined. but she was a political officer. And so the charge tells me, oh, she's one of the best I've ever seen. 2 weeks later, I was in Beijing and met the DCM, the Deputy Chief of Mission. And I mentioned this political officer to whom I was introduced in Sudan. And he told me she was one of the worst he's ever seen. What? So the same officer has a reputation as one of the worst and one of the best. Who decides these things? Who sets these criteria? So I came to the conclusion that diplomacy was what I call an underdeveloped profession. There were no standards. There was no in the military, what they call doctrine. There is no equivalent of the military doctrine, right? A body of operational concepts that you use to practice your profession. And years later, after this book, America's Red Army, came out, I decided to do something about it, and that was the academy, the Washington International Diplomatic Academy, where I decided to teach diplomatic tradecraft, not international relations, not any kind of theory or history, but the skills, the practical skills. What you need to do either at your headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or State Department, or at embassies and consulates overseas. And so that's what we did. Naturally, we needed a textbook to teach what we teach. And then I said, well, if we're going to do a textbook, why not have a reputable publisher publish it? And so I approached Oxford and Cambridge, and they were both interested, and eventually I decided on Cambridge. And so to those of you who are from Cambridge here in this room, thank you. I wanted to be helpful to two main audiences. The first was governments. I hope that governments will use this book mainly for their entry-level training for their new officers. We've tried to be as non-American as possible, or to a limited extent, I suppose, to be American. Of course, most of the people who contributed are Americans. They're all practitioners with 20, 30, even 40 years of experience. We've tried to look at the skills as fundamental skill sets. Yes, most of the examples in the case studies come from the US experience. But of course, because it is diplomacy by nature, it always involves at least one other country, right? Every case study involves at least one other country. But those of you from other countries and other governments who might look into using the book, I hope when you go through these case studies and examples, you will substitute them with your own case studies that make more sense to you, right? But I think the fundamentals, in other words, the chapters, minus possibly the exercises and the case studies, will probably and hopefully be very helpful to you. We have one non-American contributor, and that is Ambassador Heli Tirma-Clark, who is Estonian, and she was the Estonian ambassador at large for cyber diplomacy, and she has written, of course, that chapter. And the last thing I wanted to say before throwing it back to Cristina, the second main audience I believe exists for this book is in academia. Yes, I know that the conventional wisdom says that you don't prepare or you don't expect people to come ready to work as diplomats from academia, because diplomacy is not an academic discipline. International relations is an academic discipline. Well, I hope this will change. I hope that more universities will start teaching something that resembles diplomacy more and more. In other words, offer not only the theory, but also much of the practical skills. And this is where I hope the book will be helpful. I've been surprised that even universities that on paper claim to teach diplomacy and offer degrees in diplomacy don't actually teach diplomacy. And I don't say this lightly, I'm not here to offend anyone, but when you look at their curricula, unfortunately, none of the, well, I see most of the skills that you need to practice diplomacy as a career diplomat are being taught in those programs. I genuinely, what I discovered recently, because I've been talking to deans and assistant deans and associate deans in various schools, actually some of them believe they do teach diplomacy. And I found that it's just because they don't really know what happens at an embassy, really, on a daily basis, right? What is the difference between what the commercial section does and the economic section, right? What about public diplomacy, or sometimes called public affairs? What exactly do the people in the political section do every day, right? So in fact, one of the people who reviewed and endorsed the book, who is an assistant professor of political science, admitted himself that diplomacy, or the daily practice of diplomacy, is often as mysterious to the professors as it is to students. And that these are his words, not mine. And you can read that actually on the first couple of pages in the book with all the endorsements. So I hope this will change. I hope one of my dreams is that we change the system in the US Foreign Service, but also in other countries, and the system that essentially has exams, difficult exams, both written and oral, to come into the Foreign Service. But then, and that's it, and you're in. But what I would do is I would have exams, because they're generic or general knowledge exams. They're not exams that sift people out to the signal that someone will be great at practicing diplomacy. I would still bring people in through exams, but then I would have a diplomatic version of a boot camp, like the FBI and the CIA do. And then I won't let everybody through, right? I would let, let's say, 80% of the people with more examination at the end of the training program of 6 months or a year, whatever it is, because I think that this is a better system for selecting people with clearer prospects of becoming really good Foreign Service officers. Okay, I hope I've given enough food for thought and questions. So Cristina, back to you.
Absolutely, Nicholas. You were very good in framing the need for the book and what is in there for the professionals that want to undertake this fantastic job, which is to be a diplomat, and which is to bring good policies and good and impactful policies to the governments they serve. I'm going to turn now to Ambassador Ray to ask him, well, you are a contributor to the book. Why would you recommend it to be read and also to be offered in the curricula of the different schools that we hope very much is going to be included? And maybe you can also tell us, what do you write in the book? What is the chapter you deal with? Thank you. Over to you, Ambassador Ray.
Thank you. Well, first I'd like to sort of echo what Nick said, or at least follow on that. I think part of the problem, at least that I noticed during my 30 years in the Foreign Service, is that people tend to not be able to make the distinction between foreign policy and international relations and diplomacy. It's you know, they're not the same. They're related, but I think people think when you get an international relations degree, you've gotten a degree in diplomacy, and you haven't. And to me, this is I think probably one of the most important things that this book does, is it shows what diplomacy is. Diplomacy is the application of skills to carry out foreign policy. It's not foreign policy, and foreign policy is not diplomacy. And the chapter that I contributed to was the chapter on the management of an embassy. What goes into actually making an embassy function, what it is, and that's something that I think not only practitioners, but as Nick said, the average person who visits an American embassy or a consulate, they usually meet with a consular officer and they walk away thinking they know what goes on. And I can tell you, having spent 20 years in the military and 30 years in the Foreign Service, visiting the consular section, it's like it's like looking at an iceberg. You've only seen that small part that's above the surface, and a lot of it is below the surface that you don't see. And that's why I think, I would say that there's actually a third audience for this book that I would recommend, and that's the general public. So few people in the general public have a clue what diplomats do for them on a daily basis, that makes their lives better, sometimes actually saves their lives, but we don't have movies and TV shows done about what we do, so people just don't know. The training, Nick was being very polite when he described the training that you get. I remember my own training back in 1982 when I left the military and joined the Foreign Service. You learn a lot about the bureaucratic process of applying for travel documents and moving your household effects and filling out travel vouchers, but you really don't have a clue what you're going to be doing when you get off the plane at the other end when you're going to an embassy or a consulate. And the weakness of this apprentice style of training that we still have to a large degree is that the skills that you learn and how well you learn them depends on how skillful the person you're apprenticed to. And if you're apprenticed to someone who really doesn't know what he or she is doing, unless you're a real quick learner, you're starting out with both legs tied together and being asked to run a race. I've often said, when I joined the Foreign Service, the first few years reminded me of, I was in Special Forces when I was in the Army, and in the military, in unconventional warfare training, even though you get a lot on the doctrine and you get a lot on how to do your job, there was one part of the training that was really interesting and sticks with me still after over 50 years, and that is, on the first day of training, to weed out the people who weren't going to be able to make it, they take everyone in the class into a big field house with an Olympic-sized pool. And you have to remember, we were in full uniform wearing boots. They would walk you to the deep end of the pool and line people up and then push them in. And in order to stay in training, you had to swim to the other end of the pool and get yourself out. If they had to drag you out of the pool, your training was over. And that, unfortunately, for me, at least, when I joined the Foreign Service in 1982, was how the first 5 years were. I was thrown into the deep end of the diplomatic pool and expected to swim my way to the other end somehow. I mean, you find someone who can help show you the ropes if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you can fall by the wayside. And that, I think, I could go on with the weaknesses I think that this book could shore up in training, and not just for our service here in the U.S., but I worked a lot with foreign diplomats in tours for 30 years. And while there are differences in language and culture, diplomacy is a lot like the military. You might speak a different language, but there are a lot of commonalities across cultures. I think two diplomats have more in common with each other sometimes than they have with the citizens of their own countries, because it is a profession or a job, whatever you want to call it, that has a very common basis. You get to a different place, but you get there through a common set of skills that are necessary to be a successful diplomat. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Maybe before we turn to the audience, there is a cliche about diplomats, right? Reception, drinks, and dinners, and elegant parties, etc. From the reality I have lived, there is a little bit of that, but only a little bit. The majority of activities are all sorts of activities, from meeting different counterparts to really negotiating issues related to economy, etc. What is your view about these cliches that seem to be so common among the general public about diplomatic life?
Well, again, I think that's because, there's no popular media that explains, everyone thinks they know what soldiers do because, there are millions, there are thousands of war movies, but there are no really good movies or even books written. There are no really good novels written about what diplomats really do. The few that come out tend to flog those stereotypes. Diplomats wear pinstripe suits and spend all their time at cocktail receptions. What I think people don't understand is we don't do that. I mean, that's not the majority of what we do. But when we are at those cocktail receptions, we're not there to have fun. That's work. Anyone who's ever had to attend work about an 8 or 12-hour day in an embassy and then spend 2 or 3 hours at night at a reception where, in addition to having to be polite and cordial to everyone there, you have to focus on what was said to you by maybe a dozen people so that you can do a report on it when you get back to your office the next day, or remember the message that you were supposed to deliver to the Minister X who would be at the party. I mean, it's difficult to get across to people that these, quote, diplomatic receptions are not social functions. They're working. I mean, they're working. And you have also had to do the work at your office during the day before you go, and it's just it's a mistake to assume that diplomatic receptions are fun time for diplomats. They are not. I mean, they're a real pain, frankly.
Do you want to comment on the stereotypes, or we just go open it to discussion for our guests?
Well, the stereotype of is just it's just not true. I mean, diplomats are not. I suppose, like in any organization, you have people who enjoy going to parties, but frankly, I think the vast majority of diplomats would rather not have to spend so much the time that we do spend at receptions when you have other things to do. I mean, if you're a consular officer, depending on where you are, your day is not boring. And to have to then spend your evening at a function where you're making nice, sometimes with people you'd rather not even be in the same room with, it is not a pleasant thing to have to do, but it's what you do.
Nick? Yes?
Okay, so a couple of things I wanted to say about the book were, as many of you who are in academia know the system very well, right? So this is an edited book, which means that the concept was mine, the structure and all the assignments, of course, is what I did. I wrote the first chapter and then part of the last chapter. And then I asked several instructors of the academy, including Ambassador Ray and others who don't teach at the academy, to draft different chapters. And then they would send me their drafts, and I would then make sure that, first of all, I added things that I thought should be in, always in consultation with the original drafter. And then I wanted to have a book that read like one book, not a collection of disparate chapters. Right? I wanted you to, when you start until you finish, to feel like, oh, this is actually one book, and it looks like it was written by one person. So, as a former journalist, that's my style. And so you will, I'm sure those of you who have read the book probably already noticed, and those who haven't and will, I hope will notice, you may see a lot of similarities between chapter 3 and chapter 7 and 12 and whatever. But it is because I made sure that it is as easy to read as possible with this subject matter. I know that those of you who teach and will assign the book to your students will probably appreciate a book that the students enjoy in addition to learning, right? The other point I wanted to make in terms of pedagogy, in particular, because I know that many of you actually are here with this purpose. We have some additional tools that Cambridge has provided on the website. We have a video demonstrating the delivery of a diplomatic démarche. In fact, Ambassador Jacobs and Ambassador Ray are the ones who acted it out. It's a simulation of a démarche delivered by the US ambassador in Canada to the Canadian Foreign Minister. We have a bonus exercise scenario among those additional tools or additional material, I suppose. And we also have quite a few additional cables, diplomatic cables. There are quite a few in the book, in the chapter on diplomatic reporting and writing, but there are more in those additional materials that you will see on the Cambridge website. So I think it might be a good idea
to open to questions.
Yes, Cristina, back to you.
Yes, I would like to invite to comment or to ask questions Jimmy Coker, who is a contributor to the book, which we see him among the group of people that we are following this conversation. And if I am not mistaken, Jimmy writes in the book about health and science diplomacy. Science diplomacy in particular has gone super important in a portfolio of the different segments of diplomacy that we carry on. So may I give you the floor, Jimmy?
Well, thanks very much. I hope you can see and hear me. I see
Yes.
Eunice.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to, can I just suggest those of you who do have questions, can you raise your hand so we know how many we have? I wouldn't want the last 5 minutes to turn out that there are 17 questions, and so please, give us a hint. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
I really have no prepared presentation at all, but happy to receive any questions. And I see that Eunice Reddick, who is another author of a couple of chapters in the book, and a valued colleague, is also still working part-time as I am at the State Department as a reemployed annuitant, is on the call. So Eunice may have more to offer. I was going to take issue slightly with what Charlie said about the stereotypes, since that was your question to him. I think some of us are sort of extroverts by nature, and that the sense that we're representing our country at these events is something that we enjoy doing, but that the main point he made, that we're only as valuable as the networks we maintain and the information we're able to gather from a wide variety of sources, is really the core of a diplomat's work. And so the idea that there are receptions where perhaps people in a certain sector or other VIPs or the leadership of the country are all present are golden opportunities to do business, to find out what they're thinking, to talk about issues that are important to us, to get questions answered, to find out, is the Minister of Health going to China? Is there a science agreement with Russia in negotiations? Some of those questions you can get answered if you see the right person at a reception like that. And so I think that the sense that enjoying the opportunity to visit with contacts that you have, see them face to face, is something that many diplomats appreciate, and that the idea of those receptions and face to face opportunities is one reason we hold national days, both to talk about how much the U.S. appreciates relations bilaterally with the country, but also to say we have a whole lot of individuals with whom we deal throughout the year, and particularly value the fact that we have those conversations and can have them face to face when we need to. And it is particularly important when, for instance, there's an outbreak. We have not valued sufficiently the day-to-day contact, I would call them peacetime contacts, with health authorities. We've seen these as technical contacts, perhaps of USAID or CDC, not things that ambassadors or deputy chiefs of mission or perhaps economic officers would care about. But when COVID hit, of course, all of the sectors, all of our relations were profoundly affected. And the fact that we perhaps didn't know who was making some of those decisions in those countries, getting accurate information about what is the spread, what are the needs, how would we actually vaccinate the population or supply chain or get products that we may need in that country, was a difficulty for diplomats as we were operating. So the sense of how do you cultivate that network and who might you need to know when a crisis hits is a very important aspect of our work.
Thank you for your comment. Nick,
Yeah,
yes, let me give the floor to you.
I just wanted to add that I believe there's a direct link between how well diplomats are trained to do their job and how effective the diplomacy of a country is. If we look around the world these days, I mean, this is not a problem from today or yesterday, right? I think that certain diplomatic failures, now there have been successes, and I want to give the credit for that. Very often we don't see, people don't get credit because, as Ambassador Ray often says, it's difficult to get credit for preventing something from happening, right? But the fact is that specific diplomatic tasks have failed because of the, let me be diplomatic, insufficient preparation or qualifications or experience of the people who are tasked with it. And this goes to every country, including the United States. And I can even give you examples with foreign embassies in Washington. And first of all, they have very tiny, many of them have very tiny staffs, right? They have 4 or 5 people in the entire embassy. So that's already a big difficulty. And it is an added difficulty that at least half or more of the people don't just have the training, the experience, the qualifications to do the very, very difficult, often, right, the very difficult work. And what is, and I just want to end with this, what is ultimately diplomacy about? It's not just about talking or communication for the sake of talking and communication. No, it's about influence. You have embassies in foreign countries because you'd like to influence their actions, policies, and behavior, all right? Well, that's not as easy as it might sound, right? And the whole concept or notion that, oh, anybody half intelligent can figure it out, it's just ridiculous, right? And so that's why this practice that we have in the United States of having a third of our ambassadors being political appointees or non-career people, most of whom have no qualifications, not even remotely to practice diplomacy, is just completely nonsensical to me. And I continue to be staggered every 4 years, actually, much frequently, because very few political ambassadors stay for 4 years, right? But anyway, that's it's a very big problem, I believe, but I don't want to spend more time on it.
Good.
I was just going to say that
yes,
Dan
Jimmy?
Whitman, who does teach, I see his hand up with the first question, and Dan is a former colleague, but he's in academia now.
Let me just, you mentioned Ambassador Reddick, Ambassador Eunice Reddick, who contributed to 3 chapters. She's on the call, but she's not in a position to talk because of some noise around her. So that's why I didn't mention it before. But we, of course, we thank her for being here and for contributing to the book and for being one of the instructors of the Academy. By the way, those of you who are interested, or people who may be interested, we deliberately extended the deadline for our summer course. This is our 7th, I believe, on 8th, I think 7th annual Summer Diplomatic Academy that takes place every July for 3 to 4 weeks. And so we are still accepting applications until a week from today, until the 15th. So if you or someone you know may be interested, this is a program that is meant to give students, both undergraduate and graduate students, but also early career professionals, a realistic picture of what this career is about. And we always have a lot of interest in it this year. Well, we usually get about 150 to 200 applications. We cannot take certainly as many people. We can only take at most 50. But anyway, so we would love certainly to see more diverse applications. And so far, I think we've got applications from over 50 countries. And it's open to not just to Americans, but to people from any country. And it's offered both in person and online. So not everybody can afford to come to Washington from the other part of the world, the other side of the world. And so we appreciate that, and we make it available online as well. So yes, I think it's probably time to go to questions. Yeah.
Yes, good, Nick. Thanks for these announcements. I see two questions, one from Dan Whitman and Christopher McShane. Maybe we first go to Dan. I think you've been waiting patiently, and then to Christopher, please.
Okay, am I audible? Can I be heard?
You are
okay,
well heard, yes.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Coker, for the tip of the hat. And I would start by congratulating Nicholas. This is a great achievement. I look forward to seeing the book. Congratulations also on involving Ambassadors Ray and Coker, because these are the best we've got. And by the way, I wouldn't be too discouraged about attendance, because 35 out of 150, I'm sorry to say, is very typical in Washington. FYI, I got the link from the AFSA announcement, if that's useful to you. Now, 3 years after Ambassador Ray joined the Foreign Service, I joined the U.S. Information Agency, which no longer exists. So a lot of what I'll say is in the clouds, so to speak. But I think some of those on this call might remember the rotation assignments that junior officers had in USIA. It was a marvelous system. You would be on the job for 1 year, going from section to section, really learning the craft. Very sadly, when USIA was euthanized in 1999, those rotation assignments went away. This is the ideal training, because you're not yet signing cables, you're not yet issuing grants or bursaries, but it's a perfect system. I don't know if it can be revived. And I would also point out that while Ambassador Ray benefited from a training float in the U.S. military, as he knows, there's almost none of that among the civilians. It's just lack of funding. And I'm hearing, by the way, that this year we may have a hiring freeze, because I think the funding is down by 9%, something like that. Now, as a PD officer, I felt that part of my job was to try to imagine what might go wrong. And I think I was correct in putting that as part of my challenge. Nicholas, I love your idea of a 6 months training followed by a second exam. My question is, because the age of entry of diplomats into the US system is increasing, it's like 35 or 36. This means that some of our best candidates will be obliged to quit a job and to leap into the State Department at, if you're adding the risk of a 20% chance of them failing, my question is, how do we capture our best candidates who would say no to that offer? Many thanks to everybody.
Thanks. Nicholas?
I think, well, they're all adults and they know the risks. And if I mean, I don't think that should stop us really. Just to not to have the system. If that's the alternative, then I'd rather have the system and take that risk. I think it's a much smaller risk to take compared to the risk we're taking now, which is just, to me, look at me. I personally know over 1,000 Foreign Service officers. And many of them become great officers, but let's face it, we all know many people who should not be in the Foreign Service.
Yeah, no dispute with that. We do have the tenure system, which to a little extent satisfies your requirement. I love your idea. I'm just wondering, it's just something for consideration, that's all.
Well, what do the FBI and the CIA do, right? If you start thinking this way, we're already losing people for other reasons, right? But it's, and look, I do want to say that in terms of training, things are, the State Department will claim that things are much better today than they were 20 years ago when Colin Powell was trying to do things right. And now I happen to disagree partly. I think things are better, but only marginally better than they were 20 years ago. And if you look at A100, or of course, they renamed it now. But even if you look at the tradecraft training that you get, for example, if you go take the Pole Econ course at FSI, the first one, the introductory one, right? 3 weeks. How do you teach this in 3 weeks, right? It's Pole and Econ combined. So anyway, I do want to give credit to the several secretaries of state since Powell and the director generals of the Foreign Service and the FSI directors who have worked very hard to improve things. But as far as I can tell, and then they allowed me to audit A100 when I was writing my previous book, and I looked at the catalog again recently. I don't think it's near where it should be, anywhere near where it should be.
Totally agree. But the FBI and the CIA have funding that we do not have. I would just leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Dan and Nick, for your answers. I have now online Christopher McChain, and after Robin. Robin, I don't see your last name. So please, Christopher, the floor is yours.
I just wanted to put the link for the Foreign Service Institute's courses is actually public and is there to see the courses that are taught. Nick, we met back in Mozambique in like 2003, I think, when you were researching your book. So it's nice to see you again. I applaud your efforts. I was a Foreign Service officer for 25 years, and then I've been teaching for 10 years. Now I'm actually back at the Foreign Service Institute teaching, which has been very interesting. I'm fairly new here, but I'm impressed with what I see and the level of training that goes on. I agree there's not as much of it as would be needed, but it certainly has vastly improved since I left. So I just wanted to point that out, and it's there for everyone to see. You can have a look at the various courses that are taught. Doesn't mean everybody gets to take them, but at least they're offered.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm glad you can make it.
Good. We'll give the floor now to Robin.
Thank you, Cristina.
Hello.
Hello. I was just thinking of the audiences that Nick talked about, and then how Ambassador Ray talked about how the general public was an audience. And I'm thinking, as far as for the academic life, that's true, because if you're teaching someone who wants to be a journalist, if you're teaching someone who wants to go in politics, if you're teaching people who interact in any way with foreign policy and with diplomats, it's important for them to know too. A lot of the political appointees come in and they don't know how diplomacy works, and it can be a hard lesson for them. So even if they had no thought that they would ever be a diplomat, having that class as part of a curriculum for international affairs, or at least chapters of it, could be very helpful. The journalists who are going to cover things, all of that would be good audiences for a book like this, or at least chapters of the book, so that they can do their jobs better later, even if it's only occasionally or tangentially related to diplomacy. Thanks. Over.
Excellent comments. Nick, for you.
I didn't hear a question, so I nothing that I disagree with. So yeah, I agree. I just wanted to make sure that anything in the public chat is being considered.
Was being answered.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions, and by the way, I work with Robin on the Diplomatic Diary, so yes, so we tend to think alike.
Ambassador Ray, you want to comment on Robin's?
I'm sorry. Can I just make? I want to pay attention to the public chat questions, and sorry, Cristina, that I'm taking away from your.
No, you're great, much efficient than me in managing the public chat.
Right, there was a question about given the current state of affairs, what do you see as the greatest learning opportunity as it relates to preparing to be a diplomat? So I think this actually hits something that is very significant to recognize, which is that almost all opportunities to get any diplomacy training currently is in government. You already have to be working for the State Department to be allowed at the Foreign Service Institute. You could possibly take some courses if you work for other US government agencies, but you have to be a US government employee, right? You cannot just, as a private person or as a non-federal government employee, do that. And so this is very similar in other countries. So that's one of the reasons I founded the Academy. And so to answer your question, the best opportunity I know, as selfish as it may sound, is at WIDA. And you had a second part of, let's see, increasing number of training. Oh, pop culture and all that. And as Ambassador Ray said, there are almost no realistic depictions of the work of diplomats in pop culture. And as grateful as I am to the creator of The Diplomat on Netflix, that she read she told me she read my book, America's Other Army, very early on in the process, and she said they refer to it often. I don't know where they referred to it, but I think that I also know that they make an effort to be realistic. Unfortunately, I don't think they've succeeded a lot in trying to be realistic. The actual premise of the show is something that I can't really get over, which is that it'll never happen, right? A career Foreign Service officer, first of all, we've had, in the history of the US Foreign Service, which turns 100 years old this year, we've had, at least in the last 5 or 6 decades, one career Foreign Service officer who was ambassador to London. One, right? And then the whole premise of being confirmed by the Senate overnight, almost overnight, and getting there in 2 days, I'm sorry, this is just not. So I've tried to watch it, but unfortunately, I don't think what it depicts is so they try to get some of the terms correct, right? And some of the, I know that there are Foreign Service officers who disagree with me, and they think that it gets more things correct, and I'm happy to give them that. But for me, the question is are we better off with shows like this or without shows like this? And so I have to admit that we're probably better off with shows like this, because at least it gives people some idea, even if it's not the exactly accurate idea. So yes, I will stop there and
Good.
Yes.
So maybe if you agree, Nicholas, we give the floor to Michelle Flavin. Yes.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Cristina.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask a few questions about the book, but I wanted to add that I'm glad that TV shows are starting to exist, because I think it allows people to recruit people that maybe aren't even aware of diplomatic roles or Foreign Service officers and things like that. I think this is my only question. I wanted to know if in the book you included kind of terms of references for chargés, Foreign Service officers, diplomats, ambassadors, the different Foreign Service offices like the Foreign Agriculture Service, DOD, State Department, aid, all of those. And I'm asking this because I just got a text message from my aunt yesterday, and she asked me if I was the foreign ambassador for the Department of Ag. So that just kind of shows a lack of understanding of how this Foreign Service world and environment works. And I do think the general public is very limited in their understanding of these roles.
Yes, well, of course. So here's the thing: many people don't really go down below a certain place on a website or on a web page. And on our website, the page that is dedicated to the book, we have the full content, and then we have summaries of every chapter in the book. So take a look. Yes, there is a list of acronyms in the back of the book at the end, and then there's also a vocabulary. What is it called? Glossary, sorry, glossary. And so every term used in the book is explained in the chapter, but also there's a list of all of them in the back. Absolutely, yeah. Without that, we couldn't have done it. So, but take a look. I know that Amazon also lets you look at the first few pages. I think what we have on our website is more useful because then Amazon stops at a certain point. But we have not only the contents and the summary of the chapters, but also the bios of all the contributors, and you can see for yourself. I think one can make pretty quickly a decision whether to get the book or not based on those. And because the book is not the cheapest, I wanted to make sure that people can know before they get it, right, what they're getting. And so that's why we've shown so much in detail beforehand.
Thank you. And thanks, Robin, for your comment. In case anyone's wondering, I am not the ambassador of the Department of Agriculture for the Foreign Service.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think we're good.
Can I ask a question, maybe for you and as well for Ambassador Ray? You focus a lot on US, but you also say that many of the practices, structures, organizational, and of course the global thrust of the book is useful to everybody. But what do you think is of difference, the essence of the difference of being a national diplomat from one country, including the biggest, the most powerful now, and somebody practicing diplomacy for a group of countries, EU, United Nations, or another regional organization?
Well, that is a great point, and we've made sure to include in the book a chapter on multilateral diplomacy. But from the first chapter, I make it very clear that not all diplomats are the same. In fact, there are several categories that I describe. And one of the distinctions is exactly the national diplomats, and then the international is not exactly accurate because they're all, everybody's international in a way, but yes, multilateral, right? In other words, and then there's also the distinction when working at an international organization like the UN or the EU or NATO, right? You can be working at the US mission to the UN, or you can be working as an international civil servant, right, directly for the UN, not representing any one country, right, but representing the interests of the organization. And so in the multilateral chapter, we actually have a section exactly about that. It's not easy for most people to ignore their national background and preferences and understanding and mentality and culture and all that. But indeed, if you are on the international staff of the UN Secretariat or the European Commission or whatever it is, you are supposed to disregard your national interests and preferences. In reality, that is, of course, very difficult. So we try to provide some substance and also examples, right? It's one thing to say how something should be in theory, right? And it's another thing to then show how it works in practice and what are the challenges that one has to overcome, even when it comes to representing your government, right? Diplomats don't agree all the time with the policies they promote and advocate for, right? Often they detest these policies, but they have to publicly sell them, so to speak, right? A good example is the Iraq War. Many American diplomats were not supportive of the Iraq war in 2003, but they had to go, including out in the public, right, on TV, and make the case for the war. That is not easy to do, and people don't appreciate that that is a skill, right? If you're not prepared to do that, well, you don't have to resign necessarily. Some people do resign, but very few. You can find something else to do. The good news in the Foreign Service is that you change your job very frequently, and for most people, 2 or 3 years is frequent, right? So you can ask to be reassigned, or whatever the case may be. Of course, you can resign. But I think it's a good point to make that in a way, it's who's the boss, right? Who's is it the UN as the UN, or is it the US mission to the UN, where your boss is not the UN Secretary General, your boss is the Secretary of State and the President, right? So yeah, thank you, Cristina, for that. That's we try to make that to explain all that in the book, because the book is already over 300 pages, and you can't cover everything. We've tried to cover what we thought were the fundamentals in each of these aspects of diplomatic practice, because as any discipline, of course, it's vast.
Absolutely. Very good. Ambassador Ray,
Yeah,
want to add something?
well, yeah, I'd like to add one point. Even when you are in a bilateral mission, that is, you're inside the American embassy to a country, you have to. I mean, there's a point where you have to learn to pull out of your bilateral thinking mode and think multilaterally, because it's very seldom actually that you will have incidents, if you're in a political section, that involve just the country you are representing and the country to which you are assigned. The example I would give there, when I was ambassador to Zimbabwe, and there was an issue with a diamond mine that had been discovered, a huge diamond deposit, and the Chinese had moved in and were using some environmentally dangerous methods to help the Zimbabweans mine this. And this issue, whenever I took it up, was not just a bilateral issue between the US and Zimbabwe because of the Chinese presence. And so I had to put my multilateral thinking hat on anytime Washington sent a message to do something about the Hwange diamond fields. I had to stop thinking US Zimbabwe and start thinking US Zimbabwe China, and how do we manage this with all three of these entities involved. So it's not easy. I mean, as Nick has pointed out, it's very difficult. In the course of any day as a diplomat, you have to wear any number of hats, and you have to be able to make the switch from one to the other seamlessly if you're going to do your job well.
Very good point. If you allow me, before I give you the floor for concluding remarks, just one comment. Now in Brussels, because the EU is developing its own foreign policy, which is a sort of additions of all the member states' foreign policies, etc. There is now a project which is starting to roll out, which is a diplomatic academy for national diplomats of the different member states that want to join the EU diplomatic service, and they need to go through special trainings so that for a period of time they take off their national hat and they put on the EU hat, because national policies are not identical to EU policies. As you said, you have another boss, and in this case, the boss that the EU diplomats have is the leaders of the institutions. So it's another very interesting exercise, which Nick, you can discuss and look at for maybe your next book. Anyway, I guess we ought to be concluding. Nick, something else to add to our audience?
Well, let us know if you have any last-minute questions.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank all of you. I think this is the type of book that will take time to start being used and hopefully appreciated. This is not something that is on a celebrity memoir or one of those things that you go on talk shows about. In any case, but it is of course, the product of several years direct work and many years behind that. And you know, I saw the question that I should have answered preemptively at the beginning, and nobody asked it, but is of course, what business did I have producing a book like this, right? Given that I started out as a journalist. But as Cristina said, most of my career was spent covering the State Department and traveling with 4 secretaries of state, Madeleine Albright, Colin Powell, Condi Rice, and Hillary Clinton. And so I saw a need. I learned a lot about the system. I was given great unprecedented access on the inside, and thankfully, and Colin Powell started it. When I first wrote a series in my paper about the Foreign Service 20 years ago, he was Secretary of State, and he sent out a cable to all the embassies I was to visit. I chose those embassies, by the way, encouraging them to cooperate with me. So there was no way that I could have gone and spent several days at an embassy and interviewed 30 people, right? Mostly on the record. Initially, it was on background, but then I, of course, turned most of the quotes to on the record. In any case, but they were encouraged. All those people in the Foreign Service were encouraged to tell me as they saw what I was asking about. And of course, that continued. And so I saw a need. I made sure that I was surrounded by the right people, and right, that's 90% of the effort, right? Then as an outsider, I saw my role really, and I thought my biggest asset was the fact that I was an outsider, right? That I think it's easier for an outsider to see the deficiencies of the system, and possibly some solutions, right, to whatever those deficiencies may be. And of course, everything that's in the book and everything that I added to the chapters was in consultation with the original drafter of the chapter. And so I think I know what I'm talking about. I hope Ambassador Ray and the others will agree. But it is a good and valid question, and I'm sure that as I go around the country and in other countries and I talk about the book, people would ask the question, why did a former journalist do this, right? Why not a former diplomat? And so that's what I've tried to answer here. And at the end of the day, I wanted to make it not only important, but interesting, right? I would like people to read the book not just because it's important, but because they find it interesting. And as I've done the best I could to make it interesting, I saw that the comment from Sean said exactly that she found it extremely interesting. So I hope that is indeed the case. And ultimately, it's also a lot about the students, because I think some of you and many others will hopefully start assigning the book beginning the next semester, whether in the United States or in other countries. And I know that students are supposed to read textbooks, but how many of those textbooks do they find interesting? And this is not your typical textbook, as those of you who've already started reading it or read it will know. This is absolutely not your typical textbook. But we weren't sure what else to call it, and the purpose is to teach those skills. And so we always, when we approach media, we're always reluctant to call it a textbook, because what producer is going to put you on the air to talk about the textbook, right? But at the same time, it does try to do exactly that, to teach skills. So yeah, thank you all again, and thank you, Cristina, very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the great presentation by yourself, Nicholas, Ray, Ambassador Charles Ray, and the others. And if you allow me, because I can take a little bit of a role of a moderator, and Gabriela Vargas, this famous artist, Mexican artist, singer, and dancer, once said, if the diplomats would dance more, there would be less wars. So I leave it to you to think whether it's true or not, but what diplomats ought to do is read the book and maybe also dance as well. So we have the best combination, less wars and very good professionals. It's been an honor to be with all you. And let's go for the promotion of the book and ensure a big success.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.